All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're exploring the world of gluten-free foods.
Sounds delicious.
And to help us navigate this, we're using insights from the Celiac Disease Foundation.
Ah, yes, the experts.
Definitely a reliable source. And we're going beyond just the basics, you know?
Beyond Gluten Free 101.
Exactly. We're uncovering some surprising facts, tips you can actually use in everyday life. For example,
Hit me with a surprising fact.
did you know that some wines even can have gluten?
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, and even those oats you think are gluten-free
Oats, always tricky.
might not be as gluten-free as you think.
That's right, it can feel a bit like detective work sometimes, figuring all this out.
Definitely.
But the good news is, going gluten-free doesn't have to mean missing out. You can build a really diverse and delicious diet with naturally gluten-free foods.
Music to my ears. Okay, so where do we even begin with this?
Well, think about the outer aisles of your grocery store. Fresh produce, lean meats, fish, dairy, all those are your gluten-free staples.
Okay, the perimeter, got it. Now, what about all those ancient grains everyone's talking about? Quinoa, amaranth, those are gluten-free, right?
Absolutely. Quinoa, amaranth, those are naturally gluten-free and packed with nutrients.
Right.
Quinoa, for instance, is a complete protein,
Complete protein, meaning?
meaning it has all 9 essential amino acids, and amaranth, that's a powerhouse of iron and fiber.
Wow, good to know.
But here's where it gets tricky. Even though those grains are naturally gluten-free, they can get contaminated
Contaminated? How?
during processing. If they're, say, handled in facilities that also process wheat, barley, rye.
So cross-contamination.
Exactly.
So how do we make sure we're getting truly gluten-free grains then?
Look for those certified gluten-free labels. That means the product's been tested, verified,
RFI too.
to contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten. That's the FDA standard.
Okay, so certified gluten-free, that's our gold standard. What about all those gluten-free substitutes out there, like breads, pastas? Have those gotten any better?
Oh, they've come a long way. I remember the early days of gluten-free. Those products, well, they were often gritty, lacked flavor.
I can imagine.
But now, food science has come a long way. You've got tapioca starch, rice flour, xanthan gum. Those have really revolutionized gluten-free baking.
So now you can find decent gluten-free bread.
Absolutely. Soft, fluffy, flavorful. And pastas that hold their shape have a good bite.
That's great news. But I gotta admit, I still get a little nervous when I see wheat-free on a label. What's the difference between wheat-free and gluten-free?
Yeah, that's a crucial difference. Wheat-free just means no wheat. But you could still have barley or rye, which have gluten.
Ah, perky.
Gluten-free is the only label that truly guarantees it's safe for celiac or gluten sensitivity.
Okay, so gluten-free it is, but gluten can be so sneaky. Where are some common places it hides?
Oh, you'd be surprised. Soups, sauces, salad dressings, even some processed fruits and vegetables. And of course, we can't forget those oats.
Oats. I thought oats were naturally gluten-free.
Pure oats are. But here's the catch. They are often processed in facilities that also handle wheat, barley, and rye, so that cross-contamination comes back to bite us.
So even oats can be tricky. What's the best way to navigate the world of oats, then?
It's a bit of a gray area. The Celiac Disease Foundation recommends sticking to half a cup of dry rolled oats per day and making sure they're certified gluten-free.
Half a cup, got it.
But even then, some people react to avenin, a protein in oats similar to gluten. Really depends on the person.
Wow, oats are more complicated than I thought. All right, let's move on to a category that's usually safe for gluten-free folks. Beverages.
Yeah, most juices, sodas, sports drinks, those are naturally gluten-free.
Okay, good to know. But what about alcoholic beverages?
Now, those get a bit more nuanced.
Okay, let's unpack that. So
Right.
is wine generally safe for gluten-free diets?
Most wines are, yes.
Okay, good.
But you got to watch out for dessert wines or wines with added flavorings. Those can sometimes sneak gluten in.
So always double check the label.
Always a good idea, especially if you're sensitive to even small amounts of gluten.
Makes sense. What about spirits?
Vodka, gin, whiskey, rum. Those distilled liquors are typically gluten-free.
Even if they're made from gluten-containing grains.
Exactly. The distillation process removes the gluten protein.
That's good news for cocktail lovers. What about beer, though?
Traditional beers made from barley or wheat are definitely off limits.
Yeah, I figured that.
But the good news is there's a growing market for gluten-free beers made from things like sorghum, rice, or buckwheat.
Wow, so many gluten-free beers to try.
It's a fun time to be gluten-free.
It really is. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Naturally gluten-free foods, some substitutes, hidden gluten traps, the nuances of oats and alcoholic beverages. What's the key takeaway for our listeners so far?
I think the most important thing is becoming a savvy label reader. Look for that certified gluten-free label, especially on processed foods.
Certified gluten-free, got it.
And don't be shy about asking questions, doing your research. Knowledge is power when it comes to going gluten-free.
Absolutely. So we've laid the groundwork for a gluten-free journey here, and in part 2, we'll dive into practical tips for navigating grocery shopping, dining out, and all of those tricky social situations.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our gluten-free deep dive. Last time we really explored the basics.
The foundations of gluten-free.
Exactly. And we even uncovered some of those sneaky gluten traps.
Always lurking around.
Always. So now let's get practical. How do we actually navigate the real world, grocery shopping, eating out, social gatherings, all while staying gluten-free?
That's a great question, and I think initially it can feel overwhelming.
Yeah, totally.
But I promise it gets easier. Practice makes perfect.
Practicing good strategies.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start with grocery shopping. I know for me, it can be a bit daunting, scrutinizing every label, trying to decipher all those ingredients.
Here.
Any shortcuts you found to make that whole process a little less, stressful? One tip I love is to focus on the perimeter of the grocery store. That's usually where you find those naturally gluten-free superstars, produce meats, fish, dairy.
Okay, so prioritize the perimeter, stock up on those whole foods.
Exactly.
But what about when you need something from the inner aisles, like gluten-free pasta or bread?
That's when those label reading skills we talked about become crucial. Remember, certified gluten-free, that's your best friend.
Right, our gold standard.
And if you're ever unsure, don't be afraid to reach out to the manufacturer.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Most companies are happy to answer questions about their ingredients, their processes.
I wouldn't have thought to do that. Okay, that's great advice. So grocery shopping, check. Now what about dining out? That can be a bit of a minefield, right?
It can be, but it doesn't have to be a disaster.
So how do we approach it strategically?
A little pre-game research helps a lot. Before you even go to the restaurant, check their website.
Oh, okay.
See, they have a gluten-free menu or options. Maybe even read some reviews from other gluten-free folks.
Oh, that's smart.
It can really help you gauge their awareness and how accommodating they are.
I often get caught up in the excitement of going out and forget to do that.
I know, it happens.
Okay, so we've done our research. We're at the restaurant. Now what?
Be upfront with your server. Let them know about your dietary needs. Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly. Ask about ingredients, how things are prepared. Don't hesitate to ask for modifications either.
I think sometimes people worry about sounding difficult.
I get that, but advocating for your health is so important.
Absolutely.
And honestly, most restaurants are happy to accommodate. Often a simple swap, like a different side dish or sauce, can make all the difference.
Makes sense. Are there any types of cuisines that are generally more gluten-free friendly?
Oh, definitely. Think Thai, Vietnamese, Indian, even some Mediterranean places. Those cuisines tend to rely heavily on rice, vegetables, naturally gluten-free sauces.
So many delicious options. Okay, so restaurants, we can handle those. But what about trickier situations like potlucks or gatherings where you don't have control over the food?
Potlucks can be a bit tougher, but one strategy is to offer to bring a dish or two yourself.
Ah, I like that.
That way you're guaranteed to have something safe and delicious to enjoy.
Plus, you're contributing to the spread.
Exactly. And it's a great opportunity to show people how amazing gluten-free food can be.
It's a win-win. Okay, so we've covered grocery stores, restaurants, social gatherings. Now let's talk about something super important, especially for folks with celiac disease: cross-contamination.
Ah, yes, the invisible enemy.
Right. So what exactly does cross-contamination mean, and why is it so crucial to avoid?
Well, cross-contamination happens when gluten-free foods come into contact with gluten-containing foods. Either directly or through things like shared utensils, surfaces, equipment. Even tiny crumbs can be a problem.
So it's not just about the ingredients themselves, it's also how they're handled.
Exactly. For someone with celiac disease, even a tiny bit of gluten can trigger a reaction.
Wow, so it's really serious. Any practical tips for preventing cross-contamination at home?
One easy thing is to designate gluten-free zones in your kitchen.
Gluten-free zones, I like that.
It could be separate cutting boards, toasters, colanders, even storage containers.
So no more using the same knife to butter gluten-free bread and regular bread. What about appliances like the oven?
Good point. If you've been baking with gluten-containing flours, make sure to clean your oven thoroughly before baking anything gluten-free.
Those tiny flour particles can stick around.
They sure can. It's all about those little details.
Now, what if you're cooking for someone with celiac disease? What are some key things to keep in mind?
It's great that you're thinking about their needs. Always wash your hands thoroughly before and after handling food.
Okay, basic hygiene.
Exactly. Be mindful of shared surfaces like countertops and sinks. Using separate utensils is also helpful. And try to cook the gluten-free foods first.
That makes sense. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Grocery stores, restaurants, but what about those social situations where you're not in control of the food? How do we handle those gracefully while staying true to our gluten-free needs?
Communication is key. Before the event, let your host know about your dietary restrictions. Most people are really understanding.
I hope so.
And if you're feeling anxious, bring a safe dish to share, just like with potlucks.
That's always a good idea.
It's not about being demanding, it's about taking care of yourself.
Right, setting boundaries.
And remember, the gluten-free community is huge. There are online forums, support groups, even apps to help you find gluten-free friendly places and connect with others.
It's like having a whole gluten-free support system.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've really tackled a lot in this part. Grocery shopping, dining out, social gatherings, cross-contamination. What's the key message for our listeners as we head into the final part of this deep dive?
I think the most important thing is to realize that going gluten-free doesn't have to be overwhelming.
Yeah, there are strategies.
With a little knowledge, some planning, and a positive mindset, you can live a full and delicious life, gluten-free.
I love that. And in part 3, we'll wrap things up by looking at some exciting trends, innovations that are shaping the future of gluten-free living.
The future is gluten-free.
Get ready for a glimpse into what's next for the world of gluten-free.
And we're back for the final part of our gluten-free deep dive.
The grand finale.
Exactly. We've covered a lot of ground, the basics, hidden glutens, tips for navigating daily life.
Practical strategies.
Yes. And now I'm curious, what does the future hold for this whole gluten-free world?
Oh, it's a fascinating time to be gluten-free, let me tell you. The gluten-free scene is constantly changing. There are innovations, new trends popping up all the time.
I've definitely noticed an explosion of gluten-free options, like everywhere I look.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely not a niche market anymore.
So what's driving this shift?
I think there are a few factors. Awareness of celiac disease and gluten sensitivity has just skyrocketed in recent years.
More people getting diagnosed?
Yes, and also more people realizing that even without a diagnosis, going gluten-free can make them feel better overall. So it's not just about avoiding gluten, it's about a lifestyle choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Prioritizing gut health, overall well-being.
And as that awareness grows, so does the demand, right?
Precisely. And the food industry, they're responding. They're investing in research, development, trying to create gluten-free products that are not just safe, but also delicious and satisfying.
I've been impressed by the creativity, the innovation in the gluten-free space.
Oh, me too.
It's come such a long way from those, cardboard-like breads from back in the day.
Oh, tell me about it. Gluten-free baking has become an art form. You have chefs and food scientists out there experimenting with new flours, starches, techniques.
Trying to mimic the taste and texture of gluten-containing foods.
Yes, and they're getting pretty darn close.
I'm thinking about those gluten-free pizza crusts now. Some of them actually have a good chew to them.
Right? And ingredient sourcing, processing, that's also come a long way. More companies are using dedicated gluten-free facilities.
To avoid that pesky cross-contamination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is huge, especially for folks with celiac.
It's all about creating a safer, more inclusive food environment for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. And even beyond just the food itself, dining culture is changing too. Restaurants are becoming much more accommodating.
More gluten-free options on menus.
Yes, dedicated menus, clear labeling.
It makes such a difference. It takes the stress out of dining out.
No more interrogating your server about every ingredient.
Exactly. Social gatherings are becoming more inclusive too, right?
Definitely. People are more aware of the need to provide gluten-free options.
It's great to see that shift towards understanding.
Absolutely. It's a positive change.
Okay, so you mentioned some exciting trends earlier. What's on the horizon for gluten-free food?
One thing I'm really excited about is the focus on ancient grains and alternative flours.
Like those we talked about earlier, quinoa, amaranth.
Those two. But also sorghum, teff, millet. They're not only naturally gluten-free, but they have unique flavors, textures, and they're packed with nutrients.
I've been experimenting with those in my cooking lately, and I love the variety they bring.
Me too. And another trend I'm seeing is a surge in plant-based, gluten-free options.
So, like gluten-free meat alternatives, dairy-free cheeses.
Exactly. And new sources of plant-based protein that are good for you and good for the planet.
That's great news for anyone who's vegan, vegetarian, and needs to avoid gluten.
Right. And then, of course, there's technology. Apps and online resources are making it so much easier to find gluten-free friendly restaurants, recipes, products.
It's like having a gluten-free world at your fingertips.
Exactly. You can connect with other people, get support, share tips.
Amazing. So what does this all mean? What's the big takeaway for our listeners about the future of gluten-free living?
The future is bright. With all this awareness, innovation, and focus on inclusivity, going gluten-free is getting easier and more delicious all the time.
I love that. It's not about deprivation, it's about embracing a whole world of deliciousness. Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive exploring all the ins and outs of gluten-free living. We've covered so much, from understanding the basics to navigating tricky situations and even getting a glimpse of what the future holds.
It's been a journey.
It really has. And one thing's for sure, going gluten-free doesn't mean sacrificing flavor or enjoyment.
Absolutely. With knowledge and awareness, you can embrace this lifestyle and discover all sorts of delicious possibilities.
And remember, there are great resources out there, like the Celiac Disease Foundation, to support you along the way.
They're a wealth of information.
This has been so informative. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and enjoy the wonderful world of gluten-free food.